Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. Today I get to chat with two innovators in the agriculture and culinary worlds. And the first is somebody who probably needs no introduction, but let me give it a shot. Tom Colicchio is an amazing chef and the founder of the restaurant group Crafted Hospitality, a dedicated food activist serving on the boards of City Harvest and Wholesome Wave. And he is the co-founder of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, which is advocating for independent restaurants impacted by COVID-19. And he is also seen by millions of viewers as a judge on Bravo's Top Chef. And he's the host of the fairly new podcast, Citizen Chef, which everyone should subscribe to right now. In addition, he is an investor in Bowery, which was co-founded by my second guest, Irving Fain. Irving is the CEO of Bowery, an indoor vertical farming company that uses artificial intelligence to grow leafy greens and herbs. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So before we begin talking about Bowery, Tom, I'm wondering if you can give us an update on the Independent Restaurant Coalition and sort of what the goals you're trying to achieve right now in light of so many restaurants being affected by COVID-19 and the workers at those restaurants, is obviously.
Sure, Danny. As you know, restaurants were forced to close, and opening is really been a struggle. Currently we have some seating outdoors in New York City. They canceled indoor dining, and I think rightfully so. And it's going to be a long road back. And so the Independent Restaurant Coalition was formed very soon after we closed our restaurants. And we actually, in a very, very short time, made a lot of progress. We were instrumental in getting PPP pushed to 24 weeks from the 8 weeks that was originally received. That was a lot of the work that the IRC did. Currently, our bill, which is called the Restaurants Act, we have bills both in the House and the Senate. Earl Blumenauer, who is a congressman from the Portland area, he wrote the bill in the House. Currently in the House, as of last count, we had 101 co-sponsors, which is really amazing when you think about it. On the Senate side, we had a Republican, Roger Wicker from Mississippi, who wrote the Restaurants Act bill in the Senate. And I think we have about 15 co-sponsors now. And so there's been a real grassroots effort to try to get as many members co-sponsoring this bill as possible and to get real bipartisan support.
Yeah.
And so we feel pretty good. This isn't going to be a normal process where this is an actual vote on the Restaurant Act in the House and the Senate, and then they reconcile a bill and the bill is passed. We think our best bet is to get this rolled into the larger stimulus package, whether it's that $3.4 billion bill or $1 trillion bill that the Senate Democrats are hoping for. If it's going to be the $1 trillion bill that the Senate Republicans are shooting for, then I think we're a long way away from that. But we feel pretty good that something's coming, and we're going to keep fighting. And again, what's at stake? I think the Beard Foundation did a survey, and right now only 20% of the responders said they will definitely open up. So we're talking about losing 80% of independent restaurants, and not only is that going to sort of as a blow to the 11 million people that we hire directly, that we employ directly, but indirectly, the farmers, the fishermen, the cheesemakers, all those people, like Bowery Greens, although you guys sell more directly to consumers and restaurants. So you're in better shape than some of the other farmers that we deal with where my oyster fisherman, 90% of his, bounty goes to restaurants. And like so many other people have had to try to change their business to adopt a different model. But you think about all those people that are indirectly supported by restaurants that are really in danger of going out of business. And so we need something here. And we feel pretty good. But for everyone out there that cares about restaurants and cares about people who work in restaurants, the best thing that you can do is to call your member of Congress and tell them to get behind the Restaurants Act in both the House and the Senate. That's the help that we need right now. The grassroots, people, everyday people who are making those phone calls to their representatives and demanding that they do something. That's what's needed right now.
Awesome. Thank you for the overview. And we'll include some links on our social media so that people know where to find more information. So Irving, you started this amazing endeavor to grow greens for New York City and other cities across the country. Can you describe the model that you're using and sort of what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I before I even go into it, I will say it's super impressive and inspiring. Like I remember talking to Tom when everything was really on fire, late March, and he was talking about, hey, something needs to be done here. We've got to take some action. We've got to act, and it's pretty amazing in just a few months to see the progress that you've been able to make and the support you've been able to garner. I think it speaks to the importance of the restaurant industry systemically in our food system, which I think I know we're going to talk a little bit about today, but sometimes people don't fully understand. And I think that has come out over the course of the last few months in a way that people didn't realize before.
Mm-hmm. I just want to be clear about one thing. It's not me. It's hundreds of chefs and restaurateurs around the country that are really working like I've never seen work before. I mean, we're on Zoom meetings every morning. There's usually 100 people or so on the call. And it's just really amazing at the amount of work and time and effort and the coordination that has gone into it. So yeah, a lot of people.
Restaurants are a part of the fabric of our society and our food system, and not just for us consumers who go and eat at them or the people who work at them, but as Tom was saying, all the people who supply them and all the components of that. I mean, it is such a vast system. That I think is really something people are appreciating in the way they never did before. So Bowery, I will tell you all about it. We certainly, I think what's exciting is it is much more than leafy greens too, which is one of the things that makes this exciting. So we build warehouse scale indoor farms, and what that means is we actually grow our crops in a totally controlled and contained environment where we stack them from the floor all the way up to the ceiling. And we grow the crops under lights that actually mimic the spectrum of the sun. And because of the way that we can grow 365 days of the year, independent of weather and seasonality. So it's a reliable, consistent supply of high quality produce year round. But on top of it, we grow completely pesticide-free food, and we grow not only in the manner, but we are 100 times plus more productive than a square foot of farmland, because we can grow more than twice as fast as the field. We can grow year round, and we get more yield per every crop cycle itself. And we save over 95% of the water when we grow. So it is a completely different way of thinking about farming in essence. Sure. And what makes that possible is a combination of robotics and automation, which we develop, and also, and you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, software, machine learning, and computer vision that ensures the crops are getting exactly what they need when they need them. Yeah. And the other really important part of this model is it isn't actually just innovation in farming, which of course it is. It's a very different way of farming, and Tom can attest to this. He's been to our farms. But what the innovation in farming allows us to do is actually innovate in the fresh food supply chain. Because if you think about food today, you get the food where the food can grow when it can grow there, right? So even just take leafy greens and herbs. There's some, you grow some in Florida. There's Yuma, Arizona. There's Salinas, California. And you move as the seasons move and as the weather patterns move, and that means food has to travel great distances in the supply chain to get to where we all are, because it can only grow in certain places. And at Bowery, what we can do is actually put the farms close to where we all are and to the communities we serve. And so that means that it's a day or two from when we harvest our product to when it gets delivered, versus weeks of time or months of time in a lot of the traditional agricultural supply chain. So it's a higher quality product, a better product, a more nutritious product, and it's a much simpler, more sure, and even safer supply chain at the same time, which is obviously really relevant right now.
And which communities are you in right now?
So today we serve the New York tri-state area, so New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And we also just recently opened up another farm, so our third farm in the Maryland area. So we serve Maryland, DC, and some of Pennsylvania as well.
So glad that you're closer to me near Baltimore. And so, there are a lot of folks in this space right now. You have Gotham Greens, you have Aero Farms. What makes you different? Is it the artificial intelligence, the machine learning? Is it the innovation around that kind of technology?
Yeah, I'd say there's three things. The first is a sort of a big one, which is I think sometimes indoor farming and controlled environmental agriculture all gets lumped into the same bucket. But the truth is there's so many different ways to accomplish this, whether it's greenhouse growing or aeroponic growing or different hydroponic methods or container farming. And depending upon the way in which you grow, it impacts your economics, it impacts your productivity, it impacts the varieties you can grow, it impacts the quality of the crops itself even. And so, at Bowery, we've really worked hard to design and develop a unique and proprietary system itself. We are a hydroponic grower, but the way in which we grow, the automation, the way our entire farm works is unique to us. The second piece is the Bowery operating system, which is like the brains of our farm. So we take billions of data points in real time through a sensor and control network, which we've developed on our own. And that data impacts taste and flavor. It impacts quality, growth rates, texture, and then of course yield. We have a plant vision system, which actually takes photos of our crops. It runs those photos through deep learning algorithms, and we actually can understand not only what's happening with our crops today, but what we expect will happen in the future. And then all that data gets run through other machine learning algorithms, and we can say, we know what's happening, we know what we expect to happen, what tweaks and changes to the environment around these crops do we want to make, and those changes get pushed out and automatically adjusted inside of our farm. So it's this incredibly rapid recursive learning loop, which is constantly occurring. And the system goes all the way down to controlling the systems inside of our farms, all the way down to work management system. So helping our farmers know what to do, when to do it, and where to do it. So a farmer at Bowery can be working at, a Starbucks or a Walmart or working at a distribution center. You don't have to have ever grown a crop before in your life. And so it really means anybody can be a farmer at Bowery. And then the third piece, which is really important, is the taste and the quality and the varieties of what we grow. And that's always been really critical to us. And Tom can certainly speak to this because I think that there's been a lot of growing hydroponically for a long time, but growing quality food is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, I mean, you're an investor in Bowery. Is that why you decided to get involved? Because of the unique crops that they're growing, because it tastes good? What were your reasons for deciding to get your money behind it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could sit here and tell you that I listened to Irving stories about artificial intelligence and about his system and the way he feeds all the plants and about the cameras and all that stuff. I can actually, I can say that, except I use only one set of intelligence to evaluate this investment, and that was taste. That was it. For years, I've tasted hydroponics. I've been people tried to sell me on it. I'm sorry, I have some lung thing happening over here. There's a little background noise. I'm sorry, and I was never sold on it. And it's really interesting when Irving, when I first met Irving and we started talking about this, and he started talking about manipulating the flavor profiles of something like arugula by using different UV light. He didn't have to go that far. There's a gentleman by the name of Kevin Folta, who runs an ag department, I think, at the University of South Florida, maybe, or FU, I'm not sure which one. But I was reading up on the work that he was doing using UV lights and changing the flavor profiles of strawberries. So I kind of understood what the technology was all about. But even then, once I tasted how peppery the arugula was, and then so I can make it more peppery, I can make it less peppery, so it was just really exciting. And then also, I think the other thing that really sold me on was a couple years back. I remember reading news stories of lettuce crops being completely wiped out in Europe. I mean, I think it was Spain. They experienced lots of floods, and there was just no lettuce greens at all to be found in all of Europe. And so, thinking about the challenge that we're going to have going forward in growing produce in an environment that is going to be continually be fairly hostile to farmers and localized markets, and knowing that you can grow all of this indoors is really a hedge against climate change and the challenges to feeding a population that's growing while it's going to become difficult to do that under climate changes. And so these are the things that make perfect sense to me. The first farm was in my home state of New Jersey, so that was also very cool. But and then obviously when you meet someone who is as passionate about what they're doing as Irving is, and just really, it's not you get a sense that it's not something he's doing just because he thinks this is a cool way to make money. It's something he really cares about, passionate about.
Right. Irving, can we dig a little deeper into this sort of idea of using Bowery and the technology that you're using as a hedge against climate change? It's not, and other disruptions. I mean, we're all experiencing a global pandemic right now, and I think the disruptions in supply chains that we saw at the beginning, that I'm sure we'll continue seeing probably in the fall and winter. How does this system really hedge against that?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of ways to answer that. The first is when you zoom out and you think about the macro impact of agriculture. It really it's vast. Agriculture is the largest consumer of resources globally by a very wide margin. I mean, 70% of our world's water, fresh water, goes to agriculture every single year, and we put about 1 billion pounds of pesticides into the ground annually in the US, and that number is about 6 billion pounds in the global market. And the impact of that is those chemicals are in the soil and they're destroying the nutrients that we rely on to grow food. They're in the water supply and they're in the food we're eating. So because of the way we've grown in the last 40 years alone, we've actually lost 30% of all of our arable farmland.
Yeah.
And so you've got this challenge that's already looming because we've essentially looked for cheap food fast for a long time, really since post-World War II in the early 50s.
Right.
And I think that what people didn't always recognize is there was a cost to that cheap food. It was just in arrears in essence. And that cost is now coming due. And as the climate is changing, like Tom was talking about, I mean, all you have to do is look about what's happening in California and some of these other areas around water supply, and that water is becoming more and more scarce. And I think everybody knows plants need water to grow. And and interestingly, it's not just not enough water. There was flooding in the fields, and there was a real arugula shortage recently because there was too much water. And so we're just seeing more and more of these extraneous climate events that are totally unpredictable. And when you are completely exposed to the elements and the externalities of the world around you, you don't have much opportunity to make a change if something goes wrong. And so when you look at Bowery, we are completely contained and controlled. We're in an indoor environment that we create. We can build our farm in any city, anywhere in the world, and reliably and consistently and safely grow our produce. And we can not only do that, but we can do it close to that community itself. And so what we're doing also is strengthening a regional food system. So you're moving away the reliance on shipping your product by boat or shipping your product by airplane or shipping your product by truck. And it's really a short hop from a Bowery farm to any of the retail partners or the restaurant partners that we sell to. And that's really important. I mean, almost 50% of the food, about 45% of the food in the United States that we consume, produce, is imported from other countries.
Right. It's a shame. It doesn't have to be that way. Can you dig a little deeper into this idea of strengthening local food systems? Because from my understanding, operations like Bowery take fewer sort of employees, right, in terms of growing the crop.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of important aspects to this, and Tom will definitely have a lot of thoughts because I think we talked about this a little bit ago, but the local farms are inextricably tied to the local restaurants and the local food service community in cities and in communities everywhere. In our case, we certainly have the capability to farm much more efficiently, given our automation and the robotics we have and our software and our technology. But we absolutely rely on farmers at Bowery, and the farmers are critical components of who we are and what we do every day. And I think sometimes there's this misconception that automation is binary. It's a zero-sum game, right? It's either all automated, no people, or only people and no automation.
Right.
The truth is that most of the time, it's actually somewhere in the middle. And automation can
should be.
Yeah, exactly. It actually makes people's lives, their daily jobs, oftentimes much easier. It allows our farmers to focus on the quality of the product, making sure everything's running smoothly. And that's just our farmers. When you zoom out a little bit further, if you look at the local food systems around cities, there's actually much more demand for local food than there is supply. And certainly, I mean, think you're in Baltimore, we're in the New York area. you can't get local food year round. So you've got a few months of time where that local food's available, and then it goes away. And
yeah, the other thing is it's never going to actually, this is never going to actually get rid of farmers. There's certain things that Irving can't grow. There was a question like, what crops can't you grow? Root vegetables do not grow. We messed, Irving's messed around with some of the stuff, and actually it's great success. But we're still going to need, farmers, and we're still going to need ground. And so this is just, I actually look at this as working hand in hand with farmers that are growing in ground. I don't think this is something that's going to completely get rid of those farmers.
And I actually think the goal is to strengthen the local food system because, we can grow a lot, but just because we can grow many crops doesn't mean that there isn't still increased demand for those crops. In fact, you can grow the share of pie ultimately from a local perspective. I think you're seeing consumers are looking for local more and more. And the idea isn't that Bowery will be the only source of local food in the communities where we are. Like if we can help grow that pie and that focus on people buying from local purveyors, local farmers, and supporting that local food system, it ends up buoying that entire regional system itself.
Agreed. And I think a lot of the criticism, that you're not growing in soil, from especially a lot of, organic farmers who've been doing it a long time, that criticism is unfounded in many ways because of what you just said. This is part of a system. And if you only have one way of growing something, that's not going to contribute to, one, the diversity, or two, the resiliency. And I think that's what we're trying to think more about now is how do we create more resilient food systems that employ folks, that provide food that's, affordable and accessible and nutritious and safe and delicious. And so can you dig a little bit deeper into these safety concerns that, we've seen huge outbreaks of different kinds of diseases or, crops being infected with E. coli, crops like spinach over the years, you can prevent a lot of that contamination.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, food safety has been a top priority of ours at Bowery from the very beginning. And, I remember talking to Tom about this really early on. And we've really prioritized our focus there because we sell under the Bowery brand and the Bowery name. And so that means consumers are picking up our products and they need to trust what they're buying and they need to rely on what they're buying. And I think, you mentioned this, but there were more food safety incidences in 2018 than there had been in the prior decade. And I'm not sure anybody knows why that is, to be honest with you, but what is certain is there's just a lot of risks outdoors. It's hard to control. There's irrigation runoff, animals, and then there's big centralized processing. So if there's a problem in one place, it can ultimately contaminate a whole supply. And there's very little transparency then to trace that problem back, which is why they'll pull romaine off every shelf across the country. And, we have so much more control so that we don't have those same type of exposure and that same type of issue in our farms. We purify our water so that we know it's safe and we know it's clean. And because it's contained and controlled, the externalities, again, that affect the field that produce a lot of these food safety incidences just aren't present at Bowery.
Right.
And listen, often when you see E. coli, it's something that sort of gets into the food system, whether it's spinach or romaine, typically it's because there are no hand washing facilities in the field. We're talking about a field that could be 2,000 acres. There may be a porta-john, but it could be an acre away, a mile away. And so to walk into Bowery Farm, you almost have to don a full suit of PPE. You have to put on a gown. You have to have a hairnet on. I don't think I had to wear a hairnet, but
even Tom had to wear a hairnet.
But you have to actually, and you walk through a sticky mat to get anything off of your shoes, if there are any seeds or anything like that on your feet, and it's pretty locked down. And so there's walking in there, I think there is very, very little risk of that kind of contamination. But Danny, while you're on, when you're talking about what's going on in the food system right now and how to make it more regional and how to make it more resilient and more local, we have to talk about some other issues. We need to talk about whether or not the large meat packers are in violation of the Sherman Act and the Packers Act and things like that, because we're looking at 4 companies that control about almost 70% of the meat that's processed in this country. And so when you're looking at some of the big problems that we have right now with one plant that has 3,600 employees in South Dakota, when you have 1,000 employees that are sick, and the number's probably even higher than that, and they have to shut that down. And 5% of the pork that goes through there gets shut down. And then those farmers that are growing those pigs have to make a choice between feeding them, which at that point, if they continue to grow, they can't put them through that facility anymore. They have to find some small regional processors which they can't find, or they euthanize them, or in most cases, people just are forced to go back to work and continue to get sick. And so, the problem right now is we have about 800 meat processing plants in this country. 50 of them produce 90% of the meat that we eat. Now think about that. Now also,
it's crazy.
The USDA, they issue about 25 different licenses by which you can process meat, and yet the bigs, and 2 of those companies are owned by foreign. One, Smithfield is owned by the Chinese, and JBS is owned by the Brazilians. They are not concerned with what happens in that community. They're not looking at whether or not their wages are so low people actually can't make a living that really affects the community. And so the other thing is that they make sure, because of the lobbying dollars that they spend, they make sure that the USDA does not give those licenses out. And so if you are a small farmer, I'm on the North Fork of Long Island right now. We have in Mattituck, we have this great woman, Holly Browder. She grows the most amazing chickens. She can slaughter, 2,000 animals a week. That's it. And she can't break them into parts, so she can't sell them to supermarkets. She can only sell whole chickens, and she can only sell them at her farm or at a farmer's market. That's the license that she has. And it's those big companies make sure that the USDA does not give out a more robust license, because they want to control it, and they don't want the small producers to produce this type of food.
Yep. I mean, it's a mess in so many ways, and what COVID has done is really expose these, these inefficiencies, these cracks, the different ways that, our food system actually doesn't work.
Well, no, I see. You could say it doesn't work, but it works exactly the way it's intended to work.
Right. The way,
it's working the way it's intended to work. The problem is
the industrial food system.
We need to change that intention away, and we need to move it towards a more regional system. And this has to happen in Congress. Shelley Pingree, who's the congresswoman from Maine, she's working on a great bill right now that will spread some of the stuff out right now, especially issuing more of those licenses. And there's a bunch of other stuff now working its way through Congress. But I think, COVID has definitely exposed the fragility of our system. And again, going back to Bowery, they're actually there to prevent this fragility. They're actually strengthening the local system.
And I think what's been fascinating for me is, and Tom and I talked about this a couple of months ago, we were on the phone, is that everybody, I think, started to see these news stories of, euthanizing animals or plowing under crops, and people said, oh my God, I can't believe our food system has just got this, became this fragile or became this susceptible, when in reality, the food system has been this way for quite some time. I think just many consumers and many people have just taken for granted the ability to walk into a grocery store, have what you want sitting there on the shelf, and actually what's required to allow that to happen, and all the different pieces and the parties that can make that happen. And the minute in the food service industry in general, broadly, not just restaurants, but large cafeterias and stadiums and all these places, they're an important component of the entire system as well. And so when all of that went offline, you had all of this extra, you had meat producers and you had vegetable producers who didn't have a place to go. And it wasn't just as simple as rerouting what they had, as Tom was saying. And I think go back, and it was interesting. I was having a conversation as well with David Barber recently. He was talking about this also, that you could have chickens or you could have pigs, but us as consumers are used to buying drumsticks or buying, breasts of chicken in a package, and people don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with a whole chicken, or don't know what to do with a beef cow, or even sometimes don't know what to do with certain vegetables, because chefs oftentimes provide that middleman between the product and the end dish, or you have all these butchers that used to exist, and the fishmongers, and all of this like rich kind of middlemen who can take the product and make it ready for consumers. A lot of that's actually evaporated as well.
We've lost all of that infrastructure for sure.
Right. I just noticed in the chat here, there was a poultry farmer from Pennsylvania who mentioned he was just talking about this. And, if you're a small producer, typically the way things work is that you're essentially a sharecropper. I'm not saying this gentleman is, but typically you're a sharecropper, meaning that the company gives you the chickens. They tell you what feed. They sell you the feed. They tell you how you have to raise those birds. They tell you what kind of upgrades you need to make to your facility, and so you go into debt doing that. And then because you're forced to sell to them, they set the price. And there's kind of a lottery where if your birds are better, maybe you get a slight uptick, but that doesn't come from the company. It comes from the person who doesn't have a great crop, who gets less.
Right.
Then if you speak up, what they do is they give you deficient birds and they give you deficient seed. So you can't actually win the lottery. So you're essentially a sharecropper. It's impossible. And then the problem is a small farmer, they have no place to bring the birds to process because the regional processors aren't there. They used to be there. They're not anymore. And this goes back, actually all started right after the war when, poultry wasn't a thing until after the Second War, because they started rationing red meat. And they said, well, okay, let's start growing chickens. And then obviously in the 80s, some of the laws changed or relaxed. And a lot of these companies were able to actually just become more and more concentrated. So if you're a small farmer, trying to produce meat, and again, out in Long Island, I've other friends that do pork and lamb and chickens as well. There's no slaughterhouses out here. Right. You have to take your birds or your lamb and ship them to Connecticut, and then to bring them back to your farm. So it's really inefficient. It's really inefficient.
Absolutely.
And I think taking it back to where we were, in the beginning, is that, and Tom had said, this is how we fit in at Bowery. It's this idea that obviously the animal side of the equation is different than fresh produce, but even in fresh produce, a lot of the processing and the packaging gets done in big centralized areas. Right. And back to your point, Danny, earlier, this is why there's a lot of food safety incidences. Then also because of the fact that if there's one problem in one farm, it can contaminate that processing area, and then every other farm's product going through that, and that ripples back. And in essence, we are building that local regional source of product. In each of our farms, we're hiring people out of that local community. We're selling into the local community. We're spending time with nonprofits in our local community. And it really is a localized farm in each of our farms at Bowery. And that's a really important part of the model. And it creates a resiliency, to your question earlier, to disruptions that can happen in one area or climatically broadly in a region and shut down an entire food system.
Right. I want to go back to a viewer's question about the nutrition profile. We talked about the flavor profile, but they wanted to know how different. Here's the question: how does the nutritional value compare to food grown in soil?
Yeah, so I think this is we get this question sometimes, and what's I think surprising to people sometimes is that our crops at Bowery actually have oftentimes better nutritional content than what you would typically get off a store shelf. And the reason that is because food can lose up to 50% of its nutritional value in the transportation over long distances and with a lot of time that transpires. So, real locally grown food is different, but product is traveling thousands and thousands of miles in week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks more. There's degradation the minute that product is harvested and leaves the field. And in our case, we're harvesting and delivering a day or two later, so the nutritional quality of the crop is much higher. The other piece of this is the soil isn't a source of the nutrition itself, in the sense of soil is where crops gain nutrients. It's where they gain water. The nutrients, of course, are in the soil, but the nutrients oftentimes are put in the soil by farmers themselves. And so what we do at Bowery is because we grow hydroponically, our roots are in the water, and we can give the crops exactly the nutrients they need and that same microbial environment around the root system itself. So the crops are getting all the nutrients, all that healthy microbial environment around them to grow in the best way possible, but they're lacking a lot of the pathogenic components that can be in soil that can cause some of the issues. So soil itself isn't the source of nutrients as much as it's a conduit by which roots can pick up water and nutrients itself.
Absolutely. Tom, from a chef's perspective, why, you have a lot of things that you're concerned about as a chef and as a parent, and one of them is, obviously the nutrition side, but you're also concerned about sustainability. And how do you see, Bowery contributing to the sustainability of a restaurant when they all come back and we're able to operate in a better manner? How do you think that farms like this contribute to the sustainability of a restaurant? Tom, we can't hear you.
We have to make sure that we're buying from sources that are sustainable as possible, and Bowery is as sustainable as it gets because they're not using pesticides, insecticides, not using fertilizer, and they recirculate 95% of the water. That's about as sustainable as it gets. Yeah. And so just buying from sources that are sustainable is really important. What you do in the restaurant in terms of lowering your food waste, food waste in restaurants, there's not a whole lot of it, only because we're trained not to waste food. And also any odds and ends of things go into family meal. And so, there's not as much waste. I mean, quite frankly, I cook, especially nowadays, I'm cooking at home. I'm only cooking at home. I garden, so I have a compost pile, and there's got to be at least, in volume, about a gallon's worth of scrap that goes into my compost every day. But in the restaurants, you don't see so much of that. And so, I mean, there's waste, obviously. But in terms of sustainability, the question is, who are we buying from? And what are we doing to ensure that those farmers or those producers are producing in the most sustainable way? That's the real question about sustainability.
And I think the only other thing I'd add is the other equation Tom was talking about. If only I was able to cook as well as Tom was, I would probably waste less food at home also.
If only we all were.
Yeah, fair enough, right?
Hey, I'm getting tired of my own food right now. Trust me.
Sure, me too.
You're getting tired. You can imagine how I feel, right? So your versatility is greater than mine. But what you find in a lot of food waste is food spoilage. And interestingly, it's not just spoilage at someone's home, it's also spoilage even on the shelf of the grocery store. And this is another area where we really focus at Bowery. And because you're delivering a product so quickly after harvest, it just lasts a lot longer on the shelf of stores. And that's a big benefit to our retail partners, first of all, because there's an economic benefit to not having a throwaway product. And then they don't want to waste food. But then also, and I'm sure many people who are listening here have had this experience where you buy a package of greens or, buy some salad, buy herbs. Either you buy too many herbs and you end up wasting half of them, or you bring the salad home, you open it, and a day later it's bad. Right. And you end up throwing it away. And in our case, our product can sit in a refrigerator for 2 weeks and still be good. And so it reduces the food waste in those different components, because I think Tom's right. Chefs are probably the model in terms of how you waste less. But most of us layman cooks can't do what they can do.
Right. No, and that waste, go ahead.
Can you excuse me 1 second? I have something on the stove I just need to check.
Absolutely, no problem. I mean, I think that waste issue is such an interesting one. I've noticed since March, getting produce from grocery stores, it goes to, I won't buy produce from grocery stores anymore. I'm getting it from my CSA or from, the farmer's market, because it's traveled so far, so this idea of having better quality, better, sustainability, because folks aren't wasting as much, or, the product was grown in a really sustainable way. The other side of this that I really want to talk about, though, is the access and affordability question. So you've expanded into Maryland. That's awesome. How do we make these kinds of foods more accessible and affordable? I know, Tom, you're very interested in and have been vocal in the anti-hunger movement. How do we make these foods that are grown in the sustainable way, that are delicious, that have these amazing flavor and nutritional profiles, how do we make them more accessible to folks?
Yeah, and Tom will have our perspective here. We actually partnered with Tom, God, it feels like a million years ago, but it probably wasn't that far along. We did a pop-up for a couple of days, and all the proceeds went to Feast, which is one of the nonprofits in the New York area. And So from the very beginning, when I started Bowery, we have really believed that we need to be an important community member. And one of the things we say is that farms make great neighbors. And being a great neighbor means a lot of things. It means providing food to your community. It means hiring people out of that community. And it also means helping people who may be in need and underserved. And so we've really committed to that from the start of the company. So, whether it's in New Jersey and New York, where we work with Teens for Food Justice or Table for Table, or Bayou in Maryland, we are the largest produce supplier to the Maryland Food Bank right now. And we also partner with DC Central Kitchen. And exactly to your question, we're a part of their Healthy Corner Store program. And what that means, awesome. Actually, you may know this, but so they go in and to these bodegas in communities where there isn't great access to grocery stores and to fresh produce, and they'll put a cooler in that bodega and will deliver in fresh produce. And so those communities where people would otherwise have to get on buses or take trains or drive for long distances to find that quality food, they can now find it at their neighborhood convenience store or bodega. And so we're putting Bowery packages in those refrigerators so we can give better access out to the communities that we're a part of. And I think that's a really important component of what we do at Bowery, and it's a responsibility of ours to be a good community member.
That's awesome. And that responsibility angle, I mean, when you start a company from the beginning with these things in mind, it's much easier to keep doing it. I think it's companies who didn't start with that kind of frame that, have to sort of change, especially now during COVID, to become more sustainable, to become more sort of responsible, as you mentioned. I think that's, really, really important.
And you sort of see it. I think one of the reasons I started Bowery was because there was a problem that I just felt was incredibly important for us to solve for not only this coming generation, but generations to follow. It was a problem I personally had passion for. And, that mission was really underlying to everything we've done from that day forward. And it's an advantage for us because you look and there's a lot of companies now who are looking to bolt on mission to what they were already doing because there's a lot of interest in mission-driven companies right now. And I think that I hope that the next generation of entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs that are coming now are really starting with mission first, because I think when you do, that's how you can really make an incredible impact.
Well, and going back to the cracks that COVID has, exposed, I think new companies, if they don't have that mission-driven approach, they're not going to succeed in the future. I mean, I think people really understand now more than ever that food companies need to have a greter responsibility. Tom, did you want? I don't know how much of that you heard. Do you want to comment on any of that?
Well, I heard it all. I had some beets that I picked this morning that I'm just cooking, and I wanted to make sure they weren't boiled.
That's great. Don't waste.
I'm doing I have a potluck to go to tonight. We have a little bubble out here in our little neck of the woods, and so I'm doing a beet salad of sorts to listen. There's a bunch of stuff that can be done, and I go to policy. I think the Double Bucks program. For those that don't know what it is, if you're shopping in a farmer's market and you're buying produce and you're using SNAP or food stamps to do that, if you buy fruits and vegetables and say you spend $40, you can go to a kiosk in the farmer's market and get a coupon or a coin for another $40 to go double the amount of money that you could spend for fruits and vegetables. And why this is really great is because nutrition in this country is expensive. Calories are cheap, and that's the problem. Is that why often you have in food insecure homes you have obesity at the same time, because with the dollars that you have, you can buy nutrient dense food that has very little nutrition but a lot of calories. And so we have to shift that model over to creating an incentive, and then let's say an incentive to spend to have your dollars go a little further to buy fruits and vegetables. And so if there was a way, and right now you can't, that program is only in farmers markets. And so if it were extended to the produce section, and only the produce section in supermarkets, especially supermarkets that were in areas where there weren't farmers markets and have access to farmers markets, that would be a good way. And then, I would encourage someone like Irving to say, okay, if you're going to sell into that system, maybe there's a public-private partnership you can have here by which you can reduce the price of your produce that is actually going into that type of market. So, and that's an example of how do you make more nutritious foods more affordable and more accessible?
Yeah.
And I think there's policy answers to do that.
Lots of solutions there. Yeah. Go ahead.
If I may, I think that there's another
Please.
side of this whole discussion as well. And so we're talking a lot about the access piece, and I think the snap point that Tom brings up is incredibly important. The other side of this is education. So there's both the access piece, but then there's the education piece from food insecurity.
Yeah.
Helping people understand, like you can buy a Pop-Tart and you pull it open and you eat it. That doesn't take a lot, right? But someone buys kale, and not everybody necessarily knows if they buy kale, what do you do with kale? I mean, Tom's talking about cooking his beets. I'm pretty sure I don't cook beets the way that Tom cooks beets, right? He knows how to do that. And so not everybody actually knows what to do and how to cook healthy food and why eating healthy actually matters, and like where our food comes from, and things that some of us may take for granted. And so like, you have to pair not only the access piece but education together. And when you put access and education together, it amplifies the impact.
So that's what we do at Feast. Actually, we actually teach adults how to. But I don't disagree with you. But I think if we're going to talk education, that education needs to happen in school. We don't teach nutrition in schools. In fact, if you go to medical school, you don't really learn much about it. And so we need to actually start teaching nutrition and almost those home ec courses that maybe, at least when I was in school, that's when it started getting phased out. I'm old enough to remember some of those courses. But I think we should start teaching our children about nutrition at a very young age. And typically what happens when you teach a kid, especially a kid who's in kindergarten or first grade, they're going to go home and teach their parents. And so we need to change our school curriculum. I don't know. I mean, Alice Waters has been a big proponent of this through Edible Schoolyard, where she thinks not only should we have better nutritious foods and a better farm to school pipeline in schools, but that we actually take that cafeteria and use that as a way to teach people and teach children about nutrition. So again, I agree with you, but I think we need to actually get it going at a much younger age. And again, this is something that you're planning for 20 years down the road.
Absolutely.
But the reason this is important isn't so much. Yeah, I mean, listen, I could say I have a knee-jerk liberal reaction to want to help people. Let's push that aside for a second. If we want this country to continue to thrive, we need everyone to contribute. And when kids have the proper nutrition going to school, they can learn. Without proper nutrition, kids are stunted. They're not going to learn. They're not going to be able to contribute as much. And so, really, if you think about this, when you talk about nutrition, you talk about education around nutrition, you talk about access to healthy food, we need a healthier country. If we have a healthier country, that's how our healthcare costs come down. I don't care how you provide that healthcare cost. If you have a healthier country, the costs are going to come down. I mean, right now, 25% of the kids that show up to fight in our armed services wash out because they are not fit to fight.
Right.
And so we need to start thinking about nutrition, not in terms of the nanny state telling you what you should do, but in terms of what's best for our country.
Absolutely. It's national security.
Right. And then all of a sudden that changes that conversation. And so now you're having this conversation with conservatives and you're having this conversation with people who are in red states. Because now all of a sudden you change the conversation, you reframed it. Now you're talking about something that actually benefits everybody. It's not about someone telling you what you should do.
Absolutely.
And again, I think everybody should be wearing masks, but that's just me.
I think so too. The more the better, so we can get over this more quickly. I've been saying that every day on this podcast. No, I mean, again, this is an issue of national security. This is not about, it's not, Republican or Democrat. It's something that we should all be working towards and have, our backs really behind it, because it is long term. As you said, you start this now. 30 years from now, you're going to have a much healthier population who doesn't have diabetes or, heart disease or any of these other diet-related illnesses that have made COVID so hard to fight.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there is many people who believe one of the reasons we're struggling as much as we are in this country, one of the reasons is because the health in this country of our average American is not where it is in a lot of other places. And that comes down to the food system. And that, I think that's what is really important for everyone to realize, is that food is really, and agriculture is at the epicenter of so many of the challenges that we face every single day, even if it doesn't correlate directly. but tangentially, and healthcare is a great example of that. Food and healthcare inextricably tied to one another, whether we realize and see that or not.
Well, I mean, food just is tied to everything that we're doing in this country. And I think, again, COVID has exposed this. When you have all of these restaurant workers out of jobs, the restaurants used to be places where people had their first job or put themselves through school. If we don't have that source of employment for folks, down the line, then we're going to be in real trouble.
Right. We have to make sure it's not their last job.
Right. Absolutely. Before I ask the final question, I want to make sure you both give out any websites or handles that you want to use or want people to know to get more information about you.
I'm always terrible at this, but you said at the top of the show, Citizen Chef podcast. Check it out. We are tackling issues like slavery in food. I had a great discussion with two of my small suppliers. We're looking at immigration and the effects it has on food, looking at corporate concentration. And so, we're looking at news of the day through food. And obviously, the big news of the day now is COVID, so it does creep into the show as well.
But every conversation.
Chef, it's on iHeartRadio.
That's great. Irving?
I never get asked this. So, mine is easy. If you live in the New York or New Jersey area, or you live in the Maryland or DC or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, please look for Bowery in any of your local markets. And if they don't carry Bowery, you can certainly ask them to. You can find us at boweryfarming.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. And even if you don't live anywhere near where our farms are, but believe in the mission and what we're doing, we always appreciate the support and get in touch, because I think these are problems that are important to all of us to solve.
Yeah. I heard through the grapevine, Irving, that you did a refresh on the brand.
This is true.
I'm still wearing the old. So I'm expecting some swag soon.
Hey, the new swag is yet to come out, but it's coming your way when we have it. Maybe I'll even hand deliver it to Matatuck if I can get some of a home cooked Tom meal.
Awesome.
That's great. And we'll have those websites available at foodtank.com and on our social media. So my last question is really about predictions. Where do you think we'll be this time next year?
God, hopefully we'll have a vaccine. Hopefully enough people will actually have access to that vaccine. Hopefully people have access to that vaccine will actually take it and not decide that they're going to make a political statement by not taking a vaccine.
It's not a political statement. It's a stupid statement.
Yeah, and because to me, that's the only way to get back to normal. And depending on who you talk to, there's some estimates that maybe late fall. Some people I talk to say, forget it. It's not going to happen for years. But we're in trouble right now. Small businesses are in deep trouble. Restaurants are in deep trouble. Every single day, I'm hearing of restaurants that are closing. One of our members, IRC, Robert St. John, he's a restaurateur in Mississippi, just closed his restaurant after 32 years of being open. 32 years. Susan Gowen just closed her flagship in California, not opening up again. And I'm just, more and more this is going to happen. We're in an impossible situation. And but I don't see anything coming back to normal at all unless we get our arms around this, take it seriously, and obviously, hope for a vaccine.
Absolutely. Irving, where do you think Bowery will be this time next year?
Yeah, Bowery I can speak to as well as what Tom said.
Sure.
I think the consumer confidence is such a driver to everything that Tom was just talking about as well. And I think consumer confidence will come obviously from a vaccine, but I think better therapeutics and better treatments, and hospitals and doctors having a better understanding of how to handle things, in absence of a vaccine, hopefully can get us at least confident sooner, so that, restaurants can start to open, more effectively in some capacity, at least. As far as our part of the food system in Bowery, I think one of the things that I've seen with COVID is it doesn't create brand new behaviors, but it accelerates a lot of behaviors that were under the surface. And so these questions of transparency into the food system. How was my food grown? Where was it coming from? How many people were handling my food?
Right.
Are only going to, I think, become more important. And so surety of a supply system, simplicity of supply chain, and the
Absolutely.
safety of the food, that is going to matter more and more to consumers, and therefore it'll matter more to retailers. And I doing what I do, you have to be an optimist. So I am an optimist in the local and the regional environments and their resiliency. And I really hope that we can take this opportunity to relook at the supply chain overall and say, okay, how do we make this better, and how do we make it more resilient, and how do we make it work more effectively for us?
I too am an optimist, and I really hope that this situation gives us an opportunity to reflect and then really transform the way the food system has looked for the last 50 or 60 years and make it into something new, have a real revolution of what our food system looks like. And, you know, to Tom's point, you know, having a podcast like Citizen Chef, we all need to be citizen eaters. We all need to, you know, really use this as an opportunity to become more involved in the food system, and, you know, vote with our forks always, but vote with your vote this year about the kind of food system that you want. You two are incredible. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Before I go, I want to say thank you, number one, for the work that you're doing. It's vitally important, and also congratulations on the Julia Child work. Well done.
Thank you for your tweet about it. Thank you so much. And again, thank you both for joining me today. A reminder that this episode will be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And I hope folks will join me on our next episode when I'll be chatting with Helga Garza. You made me verklempt, Tom. With Helga Garza, the director of the Agricultura Network in New Mexico. Thank you both. Please stay well. Everyone wear their masks.
Thank you so much.